The series that we are studying on Sunday nights, the second Sunday night of the month, is Modern Challenges to the Ancient Faith. That is, I am dealing with criticisms that are oftentimes addressed at Christianity from our modern society. My target audience are high school and college students. But of course, if you're in the workforce or you have some family members who are friends who are of this mentality, then you might also run across these kinds of criticisms of Christianity. Tonight we're going to answer the question, doesn't Christianity crush diversity? And I want to put a disclaimer on the study before we get into it. I'm going to be using the designation, the church and Christianity in its broadest sense tonight. So generally speaking, if you hear me use the word church or Christianity, I'm not talking about New Testament Christianity. I'm talking about Christianity as the world perceives it. Because the criticism that we're looking at tonight is not specifically addressed to the Lord's church. It's addressed to Christianity at large. Singaglu Theme, who is referred to as Singmei by her friends, was born in the Rongmei tribe in the extreme northeast of India. She is a professor of English at the Delhi University. And she writes short stories where she reimagines tales from her tribe, particularly from the perspective of women who have been marginalized. Professor Theme is also engaged in preserving her tribal culture. And preservation is necessary. Like other tribes in her area of India, the Rongmei tribe was reached by Western missionaries in the early 19th century. Today, the tribe is over 80% Christian, and their tribal traditions are declining. For many, the idea is that Christianity is a white person's religion. And not specifically a white person's religion, but even more specifically, a white Western religion. Intrinsically tied to cultural imperialism. And when I use the word imperialism, you're going to have to go back in your memory in history class where the British Empire marched across places like Africa and India, conquered those places, and for the most part spread Episcopalianism, or the Church of England. It became the Episcopal Church in the United States, the Church of England. And they brought those cultures under the rulership of the British Crown. That's imperialism, and that's what I'm referring to when I talk about that. And we celebrate diversity in our country, and many people lament the ways religion has been used by Westerners to destroy indigenous cultures, African cultures and Indian cultures. And that's what we're talking about tonight. Singmei was raised by non-religious parents, and she started following Jesus when she was a teenager. A friend took her to church. Today, Singmei is married to a man who is a pastor of a multi-ethnic, multicultural church in New Delhi. And her passion for literature is surpassed only by her passion for sharing her faith. The story of this woman, Singmei, illustrates an uncomfortable truth for people who want to criticize Christianity. Because some of the people who have been most affected by the wrongs of Western missionaries are also some of Christianity's most ardent advocates. Now, we don't need to give Western missionaries too much credit for the Christianization of these tribes, because for the most part, the Christianization has been done by their own people. Syngmay deplores the way Western culture has been packaged along with Christianity, which has brought about the decline of a lot of her cultural traditions. But she's also equally clear about the positive effects Christianity has had on her tribe, particularly their view of women. There's a cultural anthropology professor who was a member of a tribe close to where Syngmay was from, who put it this way: we must abandon the absurd idea that Christianity is a Western religion. I think he needs to talk to some of the cultural elites in our country. Let's use an analogy. It's not that there's no connection between Christianity and Western culture. Christianity dominated Europe for 1,500 years. And there are many cultural artifacts, and a lot of cultural artifacts even in the United States, paintings and plays and poems and palaces in Europe that are just infused with Christian ideas. The fish symbol, for example, and the cross, obviously. But while Christianity has had a monopoly on Western culture has not had a monopoly on Christianity. Western culture has undoubtedly been shaped by literacy. Westerners have also sought to impose literacy on other people. In fact, a lot of languages of South American tribes and African tribes, a lot of those languages have been put into writing by missionaries who have created alphabets in order to teach these people how to read the Bible for themselves. But there are at least 3 reasons why no one in his right mind would claim that literacy is innately Western. First of all, literacy did not originate in the West. Secondly, most literate people are not even Westerners. And third, I'm sure that the majority of the world would find it offensive to suggest the reason why they are literate is because missionaries have taken the Bible there. Well, the same reasons that we see with literacy applies also to Christianity itself. Let's go back to the Bible for just a moment, because the Bible's diversity ethic is taught from page 1. I want to talk specifically about Christianity for just a moment. Contrary to popular conceptions, Christianity has been multicultural and it has been multi-ethnic from the very beginning. Jesus created something of a scandal, of course, with his fellow Jews when he broke through racial and cultural barriers. Story of the Good Samaritan, where the hero of the plot is a member of a ethno-religious group that was hated by the Jews. It would have been very similar to somebody growing up in a household that was unbiblical and racist and hearing a story about Christianity where the hero of the plot was a black man. John's Gospel, of course, records Jesus' conversation with the Samaritan woman at the well. Jews did not associate with Samaritans. We're all familiar with that. Much less would a Jewish rabbi have a conversation with a Samaritan woman who was morally questionable. But of course, Jesus cared very deeply about these people who were marginalized in society. Everybody needs the gospel of Christ. Turn to Acts chapter 2. The diversity of Christianity was kindled by Jesus when he went back into heaven, and his parting words to his disciples were, "Go and teach the gospel to every nation." The Greek word for nation, ethne, gives us the English word ethnic group. So we could translate Jesus' statement as, "Go preach the gospel to every ethnic group." And in the book of Acts, records the wave of Christianity as the Holy Spirit empowered the apostles and other Christians to preach the gospel in various languages of other peoples. And I want you to look at Acts chapter 2, verses 5 through 11. On the day of Pentecost, where there were Jews living in Jerusalem, devout men from every nation under heaven. And when this sound occurred, the crowd came together, and they were bewildered because each one of them was hearing them speak in his own language. They were amazed and they were astonished, saying, Why are not all of these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we each hear them in our own language to which we were born? Now, notice the ethnic groups now that are listed. Now, granted, these are Jews, but they're coming from different backgrounds. Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and the districts of Libya around Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. We hear them in our own tongue speaking of the mighty deeds of God. These Jews were coming from areas in modern times that we would recognize as Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Turkey, as well as European countries like Italy. Turn over to Colossians chapter 3. The Apostle Paul had the mission from Jesus himself to reach into the non-Jewish world. And Paul ripped apart social barriers in his day. Notice what Paul writes to the Christians in the church in Colossae. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 11. He says, I am preaching, I'm looking for a renewal in which there is no distinction between Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, and free man. But Christ is all and in all. If you flip back a few pages to Galatians chapter 3 and verse 28, Paul says roughly the same thing to the churches of Christ in the region of Galatia, which of course is modern Turkey. Galatians 3 and verse 28, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free man, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And even the socio-economic diversity existed within the Lord's church in the first centuries. Rich Christians and poor Christians. For example, in James chapter 2. In the New Testament, of course, in the book of Acts chapter 8, we meet a highly educated African who becomes a follower of Jesus Christ. The eunuch from Ethiopia. The treasurer for the queen of Ethiopia. Centuries before Christianity even penetrated the British Islands, Christianity was in Africa. We do know that in the 4th century, 2 slave brothers spread Christianity in Ethiopia and Eritrea, which led to the founding of the second official Christian state in man's history before Rome became Christian. We also know that Christianity took root in the nation of Egypt in the 1st century, and it spread by the 2nd century into surrounding countries like Tunisia and Sudan and other parts of Africa. Africa, in fact, has given to the church, and I use this again in a broad sense, to Christianity, some of its deepest theological thinkers. If you've heard of Augustine or Augustine of Hippo, he was from North Africa. Today, while most of North Africa is Muslim, the majority of sub-Saharan Africa claims to be Christian. 60% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa claims to be Christian. 60%. It's estimated by the year 2050 that that part of the world will be home to over 40% of the entire world's population of people who identify as Christians. The fact is, today, Christianity is still the most ethnically, culturally, socio-economically, and racially diverse movement in man's history. The fact that an Arab outside of Detroit and you and I claim the same Savior, regardless of our age, regardless of our gender, regardless of our culture, regardless of our race, regardless of our country of origin, proves that point. Centuries of Western art have depicted Jesus as a fair-skinned Savior, and that inclines us to forget that Jesus was from the Middle East. Jesus' followers, of course, were called Christians first in Antioch of Syria, the ruins of which lie in modern-day Turkey. If you want to think about what the first century Christians looked like, look at an Arab or a modern-day Israeli. Today, that region has one of the smallest proportions of Christians, but what Middle Eastern Christians lack in quantity, they make up in history. Let me give you some examples. Iraq. Iraq is home of one of the oldest continuous Christian communities in the world. Now, in fact, when I was in Romania in 2016, I was there by myself. I was there with my dad, so it was in 2010. I'll get one of those dates right. Anyway, the local preacher, Romanian preacher, took us to a church building where Christians had been assembling and worshiping since about 200 AD, which dates before the time of the Romanian Orthodox Church. They were likely New Testament Christians who worshiped in that building. They actually took it over from the pagans. They run the pagans out, and they turned it into a church building. Anyway, back to Iraq. Christianity was in Iraq centuries before the foundation of Islam. The rapid decimation of these ancient faith communities, of course, is tragic. Back in 1987, the Christian population of Iraq was estimated to be 1.4 million. That was only about 8% of the population. But after the Gulf War, the number dropped, and of course, with the rise of ISIS and other problems in Iraq, some of those oldest Christian settlements have been depopulated by persecution. But some of the world's oldest Christian communities have been stamped out at the hands of radical Muslims. But the story of the Middle Eastern church or Christianity in the Middle East is not one entirely of retreat. 1979, right before the Iranian Revolution. And if you're my age and older, you remember that. I do, at least. 1979, there were an estimated 500 Christians from a Muslim background in Iran. After the revolution, 1980, it transformed a relatively tolerant Muslim majority country into an oppressive regime. Women were deprived of rights that they had enjoyed previously. Imams grasped power. Public executions became commonplace. And it led to a lot of religious disillusionment among the Iranians with their Muslim background. And they sought refuge in Christianity. Today, I understand that there are hundreds of thousands of people who claim Christianity in Iran. Sprouting from just a little seed, the Iranian church may very well be the fastest growing Christian movement in the world. If Christianity is the most ethnically dispersed major world religion, then Hinduism is probably the least India is the home, the ancestral home of the vast majority of Hindus in our world. Muslims form the largest minority, representing about 14% of Indians. The number of Christians number about 27 million, but it's only about 2% of the population. So does Christianity belong in India? The head of the Indian government would say no. Partly in reaction to the history of colonization by Great Britain and also by Muslims over the centuries, the government is seeking to equate being an Indian with being Hindu in order to run out other religions. The history of the British rule, the British Empire, has led many to see Christianity as being synonymous with Western culture. But the Christian heritage in India is very old. The church in South India, in fact, claims a lineage that goes back to the 1st century. Eusebius, who is the first church historian, writing about 300 AD, says that the Apostle Thomas is the first one to share the gospel in India. Now, whether or not that itself is true, it is clear that Christianity has been in India for a very long time. No later than the 3rd or 4th centuries AD, and maybe even earlier. Which means that Christianity took root in India before it went to Great Britain. Now, one of those areas of tension between Hinduism and Christianity is the question of diversity. Hinduism has historically had a caste system mentality. In other words, everybody in India is born into a certain socio-economic strata in their society. And you were born in that society because Brahma, the God of creation, put you in that strata. So there's a lot of the lower caste that are considered untouchables. Today, the caste system is no longer officially sanctioned by the government and the society. In fact, India's current president is from one of the lower caste society, lower strata of the society. But there's still the mentality there. I understand that every day in Indian newspapers you will find that some untouchable has been beaten or killed for wearing sandals or for having the audacity to ride a bicycle. The Bible, of course, by contrast, places an equal value and equal dignity on every human being. The first churches of Christ were mixed with high-class people and low-class people, rich-class people and poor-class people, slaves and masters, people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds. Yes, it caused some problems. Romans chapter 14 and 15, 1 Corinthians chapter 8, Paul writes, you got to work together. But it was there. A disproportionate number of India's Christians, as you would expect, comes from that lower class, the untouchable class. So if the dominant belief system places little value in your life, then a faith that elevates your value, that says that you are worth dying for in the eyes of God, then they find that extremely appealing, as we can understand. Gandhi, there's the illustration of the caste system. Gandhi is supposed to have said, I like your Christ, but I don't like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. And honestly, it's the mindset that melds Western culture with Christianity that caused the problem. That's what does not belong in India. Biblical Christianity, New Testament Christianity, which is interested in only teaching and binding what the New Testament teaches. That is what needs to be promoted. That lays a foundation for human equality and love across differences. The church in China does not go back as far as in Egypt and India and Iran and Iraq, but there is evidence that Christianity has been in China since the 8th century. Now, for most of that 1200-year period since that time, Christianity has not really been able to gain a foothold until recently. Today, and I'm sure all of us have heard stories about this today, there are frequent government crackdowns on spreading Christianity in China. But it seems like the more the government tries to crack down on the spread of Christianity, the more it grows. It was one of the early Christians, Tertullian, who said that the blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. But there have been those who have predicted that this would happen. I introduce you to a Protestant missionary by the name of James Hudson Taylor, who died in Changsha in 1905, 50 years after he first stepped foot in Shanghai. But unlike other missionaries of his day, Taylor refused to package Christianity with Western culture. So when he went over there, he wore Chinese clothes. He wore his hair in a pigtail, which was customary for Chinese men at the time. He renounced his Western comforts. He took a deep love for the people to heart whom he served. He studied medicine so he could serve the people he was trying to convert. It is hard to get accurate data on the number of Christians in China. It's even harder to get accurate numbers of members of the Churches of Christ in China. Due to government persecution, many worship in unofficial house churches. But conservative estimates from a decade ago put China's Christian population at over 68 million. Conservative estimates. Experts like Feng Jiang Yang predict that there will be more Christians in China than in the United States in 9 years. And that China will be a majority Christian country by the year 2050. Now think about that. Now obviously there's a lot of uncertainty. None of us are prophets. And government resistance to Christianity in China ebbs and flows with time. But what would happen to world politics if China were to swing from being a communist country to being a predominantly Christian country within the next 3 decades? How would that impact global politics? Many associate Christianity, as I've said, with white Western imperialism. And there are reasons for that if you study history. Some of them are ugly reasons and regrettable reasons. But most of the world's Christians are not white, and most of the world's Christians are not Western. And Christianity is getting less Western by the day. Now, that's partly due, thanks to the activities of non-Western missionaries. For example, the other country, the country that sends out the second most missionaries in the world after the United States is South Korea, where only 29% of their population claim to be Christians. But they export the second largest number of missionaries of any country in the world. Stephen Carter is a black intellectual who teaches law at Yale. And he observed that there is a difficulty, he says, endemic to today's secular left, an all too frequent weird refusal to acknowledge the demographics of Christianity. He points out, as I mentioned this morning, that in the United States, black women are by far the most Christian of any Christian demographic. While around the globe, the people who are most like to be Christians are women of color. He warns the left, when you mock Christianity, you're not mocking who you think you're mocking. You and I, we read the New Testament, and we find that trying to marry biblical Christianity to white-centric nationalism is like trying to marry a cat to a mouse. One is supposed to be killing and eating the other one. We're also hurting our cause of spreading Christianity in the United States by portraying immigration as an erosion of America's Christian identity. In fact, the opposite is more true. Immigrants who come to the United States are more likely to be Christian than any other religion. They're looking for freedom of religion like our ancestors. And the racial demographic that really is eroding Christianity in the United States are white people. The fact that Christianity has been a multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic movement since its very beginning does not excuse the way Westerners have abused Christianity and Christian identity to crush other cultures. When we were living in Romania, there was a missionary in the Churches of Christ who married a Romanian woman in Bucharest, and we went to their wedding. And they talked to us about how it was challenging for her to be coming out of a Romanian Orthodox church background. She's now a Christian. And the challenge was knowing the rituals of the Romanian Orthodox Church in a wedding ceremony. What can you keep because it's Romanian, and what do you have to pull out because it's Orthodox? Can you see the distinction? Every Christian missionary, in fact, every Christian has to ask themselves the same thing. Do we do things in Christianity because we're Americans, or we do things in Christianity because we're Christians? It all comes back to the question of what does the Bible require of all Christians for all time, everywhere. After the conversion of the Roman Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, Western Christianity went from being a faith of a persecuted minority to being linked with the power structure of the day. And power, of course, is perhaps humanity's most dangerous drug. In fact, you may have thought that Protestantism got its name from people protesting the Catholic Church. That's not where the name Protestant came from. It came from people protesting the relationship between local governments and a specific branch of Christianity. That's where the designation Protestantism came from. The habit of equating Christianity with Western culture is itself an act of Western bias. Christianity is not a Western religion. Revelation chapter 7 and verse 9. The last book of the Bible paints a picture of what heaven is going to be like. And John is able to see by the eye of inspiration a great multitude that nobody can number, assembled around the throne of God and the throne of the Lamb. John writes from every nation and all tribes and peoples and languages, worshiping God by virtue of their relationship to Jesus Christ. That is the multicultural vision of Christianity that Jesus has. It's the vision of multicultural Christianity that we need to have. No, pure New Testament Christianity does not crush diversity. It is, in fact, the most diverse, the most multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic movement in man's history. You and I, being dedicated to the authority of Jesus Christ. We need to make sure that we keep it that way. If we can help you tonight in your walk with Christ so that you can be a part of that number in heaven, let us know. Let's stand and sing together.